Hi there, everyone. My apologies. I'm going to be working between the two screens here, so I'm hoping this will all work out. I've got confidence that it will. So good evening. My name's Lorna Glenn. I'm one of the co-vice chairs of the STUC Women's Committee and Unite Scotland's Regional Women Inequalities Officer. On behalf of the STUC Women's Committee, I'm delighted to be welcoming you all this evening, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. We totally understand everybody's got super busy lives. We were just discussing before you come on there that it's that kind of bedtime, getting the kids organised, getting all that done. So we appreciate it very much, and for you to be joining this evening on International Women's Day Eve. So I thought in the first instance it was important that we send some solidarity to the Ukraine and with the Ukraine, and giving her, as I say, the utmost solidarity with sisters and trade unionists in Ukraine and the refugees there. Internationalism is a core part of our trade unionism. On behalf of the Women's Committee, we stand in solidarity and sisterhood with women and girls facing horrifying conditions, some joining the war effort, some giving birth on basement floors, and so many seeking safe refuge. So I think it's really, really important to start off with that. As many of you know, in November last year, during 16 days of action against gender-based violence, the Women's Committee launched a survey to gather women in Scotland's views and experiences of sexual harassment at work. Bigger demands for action on tackling sexual harassment in our workplaces, streets and wider society were called for at our 2021 STUC Women's Conference from trade unions across almost every sector and union representing women workers day in, day out. The survey aimed to build upon pre-existing research and ongoing campaigning and lobbying efforts to tackle sexual harassment at work and gather specific Scottish data about women's experiences. The findings of a report have been launched today and should make for uncomfortable reading. Sexual harassment at work, as I am sure many of us already know, is rife. No workplace in Scotland is immune to sexual harassment, and as this report shows, we need urgent action on the grounds now. So what did the survey show? 41% of respondents have experienced sexual harassment at work. A third of women have experienced sexual harassment at work within the last year. Half of respondents have been sexually harassed by their boss or someone in a position of power and seniority. 85% of women said that the report and experience was not taken seriously and dealt with appropriately. 61% of respondents have experienced sexual harassment in public and on their way to work. As our findings highlight, far too often women feel unable to report their experiences, and incidents continue to go unreported, dismissed, minimised, shrugged off by workplaces as banter and mishandled. International Women's Day is an opportunity to celebrate and recognise women, but is also an opportunity to make demands and increase our collective voice. On the eve of International Women's Day, the STUC Women's Committee are making demands to tackle sexual harassment in Scotland. Sexual harassment is a complete violation of our dignity and rights, and it thrives off a culture of silence and complacency. Challenging sexual harassment at work must be everyone's business. Tonight, we'll hear from an excellent panel of women from across a range of workplace sectors, organisations and campaigns. Our report has been circulated to all participants and will be posted in the chat box. I hope you find this evening's event insightful, and that beyond this event, you will join supporters in our collective fight and demands for change. Finally, before I introduce our speakers, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all those that helped make this report happen. In particular, a massive thank you to members of the STUC Working Group on Sexual Harassment and Megan Park for her beautiful illustration and design of our report. So, to kick us off this evening, I'm pleased to welcome the STUC General Secretary, Ros Foyer. As you'll know, Ros is the first female STUC General Secretary. She is a sister, a friend to the movement, a personal friend of mine. She's also massively supportive of the STUC Women's Committee and the movement in general, and in particular the issue of sexual harassment. So again, welcome. So nice to see you, Ros. Fire away.
Thank you, Lorna, and can I start just by thanking all of the STUC Women's Committee and the STUC staff who were involved in producing this survey. There's been a lot of work that's gone into the survey, but also into producing the report of the survey's findings. And you know, it is a very important document, and it's quite rightly a hard-hitting document with some, you know, very key recommendations in it. And I think it's really that the Women's Committee has made this one of their key campaigning priorities over the recent period. And I certainly look forward to the STUC working with the Women's Committee to take forward the recommendations that are contained within this report, because I think there are recommendations within it that can make a key difference, and we certainly need to be making a difference on the issue of sexual harassment of women and girls. And sadly, that is something that is very prevalent in our workplaces. It's a shocking report in some ways, but it's not surprising. You know, 45% of women reported that they had, you know, directly suffered sexual harassment in the workplace, and 85% felt that when that was reported, it wasn't taken seriously. And then there's all of those who never, you know, who don't feel empowered to even report it in the first place. And I think what this report illustrates is something that most of us know anyway, which is that sexual harassment is a fact of life for most women in Scotland. It's something that has touched all women in all sectors in some way. If it's not happened to you directly, you certainly know people that it has happened to, or you have watched it happen to others. And like many women, I've personally experienced sexual harassment, not just in one role, but in many roles, in many different ways throughout my career. And I know I'm not alone in that. I know that's actually quite a common you know, thing that women in Scotland and in other countries have experienced. And what I think is particularly sad is now having two teenage daughters, I am reminded that it doesn't just start in the workplace, it starts at school. You know, there are so many levels in which young girls and women are sexually harassed, and I'm sick of hearing my daughters say, and they said this, and I turned around and said, for God's sake, get a life, I'm only 12, you know. So it's really, you know, something I think we need to think about as well, is this is something that we're conditioned to accept and you know, have around us from a very young age, and it's that prevalent in our society, and it really does have to start at school. I think the change of culture that's required, because this is about culture, it is about our society, and it is about starting to question and break what unfortunately are very misogynistic cultural norms within our society that make this sort of unacceptable behaviour acceptable, sadly. So, you know, when I think one of the most serious times when I suffered sexual harassment was as a very young worker, very new into the workplace, and it was actually you know, a form of sexual assault that I suffered, and I didn't report it. And I didn't feel able to stand up and do anything about it. It was a manager in my workplace. And the only thing I felt empowered to actually do was remove myself from that workplace and go and seek a job elsewhere. So I left that workplace. And, you know, I think that that's something that we need to think about, is there are a lot of women who actually, you know, that is the only choice they have, is to actually leave. And so we need to think about how many talented women have been driven out of different workplaces, different professions, different careers, because that might be the only option they felt they had to escape harassment. I didn't have a union in that workplace, although it was a unionised workplace. Nobody had ever asked me to join the union. I didn't see it as something that I was, you know, able to access in any way. I wasn't quite sure how that worked, didn't feel there was anyone I could turn to. And when I went to my next job, I actually did join a union, and you know, on day one I was asked to join the union, which made a big difference. And I certainly think that some of my early experiences at work are what motivated me to want to go and help other women at work, people at work, and make sure that there was somewhere you could turn. So quite quickly in my next job, I actually was trained as a sexual harassment support officer by the union and the other government department that I went to work for. But I think that, you know, the one thing I would want to say is that when this report talks about silence is compliance, we're not talking about the women who've been through sexual harassment who may have remained silent, because often for those women it's not an option. What we're talking about is the need for decision makers in workplaces not to be silent. What we're talking about is the need for unions in workplaces not to be silent. We're talking about the need for co-workers, and particularly male co-workers in workplaces, not to stand by and be silent. And we're talking about, you know, people in the decision-making roles who are the employer, not to cover up, not to be silent, and to actually take it on and do something about it. You know, what we have to do is get our houses in order. We've got to take the issue more seriously at every level. And that includes taking the issue more seriously as trade unions. Trade unions can be a massive force for good, but we are also reflective of all of the problems that take place in society, including things like sexual harassment and gender-based bullying. So, you know, we need to look to ourselves as well as looking to what employers need to do and make sure that we are taking the issue seriously. And more than anything, we need to make sure that we're challenging unacceptable behaviour when we see it happening, that we're calling it out, because the low level behaviour empowers the really serious levels of abuse. That's what sets the culture that lets perpetrators think that they're going to get away with it, that no one's going to say anything. And also importantly, leads women who've experienced harassment to feel that they will not be believed, that they will not be taken seriously, that there isn't a good serious complaint system there that's going to support them. So we need to provide women with confidence that they can take these issues on, and that is about tackling our culture in Scotland's workplaces and beyond workplaces. So I really hope that this report will have a key role in helping to make that happen in Scotland. And I really hope that we will all continue to speak out about sexual harassment, to share our experiences, and to call it out when we see it happening. So I look very much forward to working with the Women's Committee to take that work forward, and I'm happy to pass back to yourself, Chair. Thanks, Lorna.
That was excellent, Ros. I think you made some excellent points there. Obviously, we're all thinking about our own girls and our daughters and our nieces and all these things as well. And I think it's an epidemic in our culture, and it's something that has to be called out. It's something that we continue to call out. And I think from my point of view, and obviously from everybody, thank you for feeling comfortable enough to share your personal experience and being so candid. And I think it just goes to show, Ros, that, you know, we're strong women, and it's epidemic across all areas of society, as you see as well in our movement. But thank you for being so candid, and I think this is what these evenings do. It makes people comfortable enough to share the personal experience and to show that candor and to show that shared experience. So just solidarity with you, Ros, and thank you again for your input. So next, I'm going to introduce Eilish O'Keefe from the Safe Home campaign, demanding employers to introduce safe home policies for workers, particularly those working in the nighttime economy and hospitality venues, is one of the key asks. I'm therefore, as I say, delighted that Eilish, who is an activist from the Safe Home campaign, is a member of Unison and the Musicians Union, is with us to tell us a wee bit more about the campaign and the wider sexual harassment at work campaigning. So Eilish, anytime you're ready, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you to the Women's Committee for asking me to speak tonight. It's a privilege to be here alongside such inspiring women trade unionists. especially on the eve of International Women's Day. So as Lorna was saying, I'm from the Safe Home campaign, which is a campaign that supports basically paid or subsidised travel home for late night workers across a variety of different industries, because we believe that the duty of care to workers extends beyond the front door of the workplace. Like I'm assuming most women, my experiences of work have been shaped by my experience of sexual harassment at work. From my first job when I was 16, where I was sexually harassed by a man 12 years my senior, and when I did build up the courage to report it, I was told it was better for me to just let it go. And again, when I was 18, I worked in a bowling alley, and there was a security guard there who would inappropriately touch me a lot, and when I did mention it to my manager, I was told that's just Phil. So from a young age, it was instilled in me at work that these things just happened and there was nothing we could do to challenge them. And as Roz kind of pointed out earlier, education is failing young women. You know, I came out of school and I had no idea what a trade union was, so I didn't realise that I had rights and things that I could go to get support with these issues. So it wasn't until a few years later on that I actually came to the trade union movement. And it was actually around the issue of late night travel that this happened. So I used to work in Cineworld. I was a trade union rep there, and the issue came about around kind of late night travel. So we were finishing work between kind of midnight and 3 a.m, and we did have subsidised travel home there. So they would contribute a few pounds towards the initial getting in the taxi, and then £8 above that. So it meant that you were able to get home safely, and that was a big kind of perk of the job, I suppose, because we were working late, and it reassured you that you were getting a taxi straight back to your house, and you didn't have to worry about walking through the city centre. And obviously, being a cinema, we could be open until really late. When we had midnight screenings, for example, and we did have a midnight screening of one of the Avengers films where we all broke our backs working until about 6 a.m, and at 9 a.m that day, we received comms that came from senior management saying that they were getting rid of our taxi policy to save money, and from that point on we would have to make our own way home, or they would contribute a measly £3 towards the cost of the taxi. So this, as anyone knows, doesn't even cover the cost of getting in the taxi to begin with, and we were on minimum wage 0-hour contracts, you know, so some people were reporting having £200 taken out of their wages at the end of the month just to get home from late night shifts, meaning that they were earning way below the minimum wage just to get home. And we were terrified, you know, in the city centre of Glasgow, there's incidents almost weekly where you'll read about a different street that you walk home along where you've read of a woman being attacked. We had it in our own back lane where women had been repeatedly attacked, and when we raised this to senior management, they just dismissed us. So me and one of my colleagues got together and we reached out to Better Than Zero, and through this we became part of the Safe Home campaign, and this was back in 2018. So it's been quite a while that I've been involved. So we came together in the union and organised within Cineworld and managed to then get a meeting with the regional manager. And again, this didn't get us anywhere. So when we actually showed up to this meeting with the regional manager of Cineworld for the whole of Scotland, we laid out news articles of women who'd been attacked in Glasgow city centre on the table, and we were told to move them out the way to make room for the sandwiches. So that's how seriously our safety was being taken by senior management who were male. And when we asked questions like, do you have daughters? Do you have children? How would you feel if your child was walking home through the city at night? To which we got the response, well, they're 4 and 5, so I don't have to worry about that, as if that 4 and 5-year-old child will never grow up to be an adult terrified walking home from work. So I think the issue of getting home safely, it's kind of came up more kind of over the past year or so. We've obviously heard incidences of like Sarah Everard, which sadly brought the subject back into like mainstream, and we kind of came together and thought it'd be good to bring the Safe Home campaign back, and we relaunched it in December last year. Particularly over the course of the pandemic, things like late night transport have been taken away, so there's no longer late night public transport. Things like night buses no longer exist, and that's just from a Glaswegian perspective. Obviously for people that don't live in a city. Public transport is often terrible. I grew up in Fife and there was no way for us to get home after certain times at night. And due to the shortage of taxi drivers, there's sometimes people aren't able to actually get a taxi home from work. So then you're left with either forking out 30, 40 quid just for a taxi journey or walking home through the city centre. And we don't think that this is something that people should have to do just to make a living. People in the late night economy in Glasgow generate over £2 billion towards the economy. That is huge. These workers have such a contribution to our city and we all really appreciate it. All of us clearly go out and enjoy hospitality and entertainment industries, and these industries cannot exist without the workers in them. And it shouldn't be the case that these workers are put into dangerous situations just to get home. And that's what we've kind of came together to do, to campaign around. So we're calling on employers to provide this, and we're also calling on the council. We've written to Glasgow City Council so far, and we would encourage people across the country to get involved to make things happen in their local area. East Dunbartonshire Council has already introduced subsidising paid travel as a condition of licensing, and it's been successful. And this is something that we've seen already happen and be a success, so we know it can happen. So why isn't it happening in more council areas across Scotland, and why are we being consistently let down by our employers and by kind of the licensing board that has the power there to enforce these things? And we've been told by licensing that they don't have the power to enforce this, but they do and they can. So that's why the campaign exists. We're here to support workers across all ranges of industries. You know, we've got people working in places like hotels, bars, restaurants, cinemas. We also see kind of things like entertainment venues. So this is all really relevant, and we would really encourage anyone who works in these industries or anyone who just supports the campaign and the aims of our campaign to get involved. We do have a meeting next week on the 15th. I believe Caitlin's going to put the link in the chat for this for anyone who's interested, and we'll be publicising it across our social media. But if anyone has any questions about the campaign, you can reach out to us on Twitter, or say I'll put the in the chat as well. But if anyone has any questions, you can also message me. And thank you.
Eilish, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think it just goes to show that basically your first experience of going to your work as a 16-year-old child, effectively, that's what you put up with. And it's these cultural norms, and that's just Phil. No, not in any way, shape or form. And I think that's what we're talking about with this kind of silence is compliance. That's somebody not being silent. That's somebody effectively sticking up for that person. And it's clearly just, it's across the board. It's so good to have you come and talk to us today. And I think you put it so eloquently to say, you know, the duty of care extends beyond the front door. Of course it does. It absolutely does. And making the points about what we're contributing, you know, £2 billion to the economy. And I think just kind of logistical things, talking about the fact that we don't have the night buses, the fact that there's the shortage of taxi drivers, these are all things that are just creating a total perfect storm. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. That input was absolutely excellent, Eilish. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Sorry, folks, do apologise. I'm just switching from screen to screen. So I'm going to introduce now Gillian Merchant from Thompson Solicitors. I'm really delighted that Gillian's joining us. Gillian's worked in employment law for over 10 years and has a passion for giving a voice to and representing women who have been wronged at work. This includes instances of sexual discrimination, harassment and pregnancy discrimination. Gillian is a committed feminist and activist and a great support to us at the STUC Women's Committee. And I must say a personal support to myself. Gillian is an officer of Unite. Gillian's always at the other end of the phone. She'll always help you out. She'll always pick up. She likes to get as animated and as angry about cases as I am, which is exactly what you're looking for. So again, thank you so much for setting your time aside, Gillian, and fire away whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Lorna. And yeah, thanks to the STUC Women's Committee and to the staff of the STUC for the invitation to come along tonight and contribute. I think after reading the report, I was reflecting on it this morning on what to say tonight. And I think my main feeling was to try and not be too negative, because sometimes I feel, I'm sure it's not a feeling that's like unique to me, not on this call, that sexual harassment and sex discrimination just in general is endemic. And it can feel like it will never change. And I think specifically for me, almost like the constant battling of it, the constant fight and the emotional toll that can take can be utterly exhausting, and it always does seem to fall on women. However, I do know from experience and completely believe this, that we can all make a difference. And if you take one thing away from what I'm about to say tonight, I hope that it's that. I think I would say never underestimate the difference that you can make. I'm going to revert to type a little bit at the start and talk a little bit about the law and a few things that you should probably look out for in relation to sexual harassment. Then I'd be quite keen to just point out a few, I was going to say comedy, but I mean, not really, probably more black comedy situations of where employers can get it drastically wrong in relation to sexual harassment, and then just a wee bit about what trade unions can do in general to make a difference. The law on sexual harassment is set out pretty clearly in the report. I think the most important thing I would say in relation to the definition is that the conduct has to be sexual in nature, and most importantly that the conduct is unwanted. There's also a separate claim that you can bring for harassment based on sex, which is the same unwanted conduct but without the sexual element, so comments, actions, attitudes, essentially, which violate your dignity or create an intimidating, hostile, degrading or humiliating environment for you at work. And that can be related to your sex as much as it doesn't just have to be of a sexual nature. And I think the reason that I revert to the definition is that I feel that so much of the discussion around sexual harassment can so quickly just turn into essentially a discussion about how far men can go, which I just find deeply frustrating, because firstly, it should be blindingly obvious. And secondly, it's about time that men started to reflect on their behaviour rather than pretending that they're somehow out there being unreasonably targeted and making innocent mistakes. Because I think the evidence in the report shows that the instances of sexual harassment were planned, they were targeted, with the perpetrators knowing exactly what they were doing. This is not a case of someone just being a bit silly and getting it wrong. It's a lot more of a serious problem than that. And I think that the way that it can be framed in debates, particularly in the media or on like radio call-ins and stuff, can be deeply frustrating. I mean, I have been asked to provide training to a union branch, which I conveniently can't remember which branch it is for, to save the innocent, to do a role play of what appropriate sexual harassment training. And I was like, a role play with sexual harassment training? I don't think I'm going to be getting involved in that. But I think that's just an indication of like what Ross said at the start, we've all got to look to our own organisations as well, if this is ever going to be tackled. Also in the report, it mentions the time limit, which it'll always stick in my head. Is I did a couple of years ago, I did some seminars with the STUC in relation to a range of different employment law issues, and one of them was sexual harassment. And when I said that the time limit was 3 months minus a day from the date of the act of sexual harassment, like all the union reps just about fell off their seat, because I mean it's so difficult, because firstly, like, if you're sexually harassed in your workplace, one, you want it to stop, and two, you don't want to immediately think, I'm going to take my employer to court, because that's not what most people think they want to do. Most people just want it dealt with. But as trade unionists, I think we all need to be aware that we do have that short time scale if there is an actionable wrong. And quite often, I would say more often than not, if you put in a grievance or put in a complaint or try to follow the policy, employers will just extend it past that 3 months, so that you are already out of the time by the time that they've bothered to get round to your grievance and respond to it properly, which I think, the cynic in me would say that was deliberate, so that by the time that they do get back, there really isn't very much you can do, or your claim certainly isn't as strong as it would have been. And I think that, the calls in the report for time limits to be extended for sexual harassment claims, I think, are really important, and it would make such a difference. Turning to employers, I think in my experience, it's really common for employers just to mess up investigations across the board. Like if you're running an employment tribunal case, the easiest thing to go for from the claimant side is the investigation, because generally they're terrible. And that's kind of as a generality, but I think specifically in relation to sexual harassment, you know, you're in a whole new ball game of bad, essentially. I mean, the Scottish Government, the way that they handled the Alex Salmond investigation is a case in point. You know, and that's an organisation with hundreds and thousands of staff, with, you know, the best HR and employment law advice they could possibly ever imagine, and it still ended up the way it did. And I think I find that really frustrating, because it's not difficult. Most often, and this is what Roz touched on as well, it's actually employers just not wanting to make a decision, probably men not wanting to make a decision. And I think in this context, it's important to remember that, you know, unfair dismissal laws are overwhelmingly in the UK favourable to employers. You know, this is not difficult. You know, and these things are, you know, these laws are regularly used to dismiss people fairly. For all other types of misconduct on a regular basis. You know, it isn't hard to dismiss someone fairly for gross misconduct. So I really find it difficult when employers, you know, come up with this, oh, it's really difficult, it's really difficult. It's not really difficult, it's just that you don't want to take a decision about it. You know, and I think that is cultural. You know, we do live in a world that was created by men for men. And I think by consequence of that, we work in workplaces that were created by men for men. So I suppose in that context, it's not really a surprise that when you're dealing with the exploitation of women, it's not something that was ever factored into how things would operate. People stealing from their employer, people fighting in the workplace, people taking drugs, you know, all of that's been thought about. But men harassing women and how that would be dealt with, you know, is not something that's really been thought about to the same extent. And I think particularly around sexual harassment, you know, investigations, you quite often get that, you know, it comes down to one person's word against the other excuse, as I would say. You know, and the story goes that it's really hard for an employer because they've got no evidence to support the complaint, therefore they can't possibly uphold it. And I just think it drives me barmy. Like, one, there is evidence. You've got the victim who's come forward, so that's evidence. And secondly, you know, if we're being honest about it, rarely in my experience, by the time someone has actually reported sexual harassment, is it the first time that that's happened in that workplace, or even the first person in that workplace that that's happened to. And I think if a proper investigation was done and the perpetrator was properly investigated, it's very likely that other incidences would come to light, or there'd be other evidence which people previously didn't feel confident to come forward with, or was previously brushed under the carpet. And even if there is only one source of evidence, even if there only is that woman, the employer should be coming to a decision about who they believe. You know, that's what they get paid for, but somehow they find that a really difficult thing to do. I mean, it wouldn't be the same if there was only one witness to somebody stealing something, would it? So, you know, I don't really see this whole, oh, it's really hard because there's no evidence. It really stands up to anything, to be honest. And I think, you know, looking through the report, a lot of people talked about HR or policies or going to HR. And I think certainly in the people that I've represented experience, HR is rarely an employee's friend, you know, rightly or I would say wrongly. You know, they see their role as to protect the company. You know, nothing to see here, brush things under the carpet, protect the establishment. And again, I suppose, to be fair, that is about power structures in the workplace. You know, those people working in those roles are afraid to properly investigate because they're in fear of losing their jobs or their influence or their promotion prospects. You know, and I think that is something that needs to be tackled as well. And that's, you know, before we've got managers failing, the other thing that winds me up is managers failing to take action unless the woman reports it. So, you know, like turning a blind eye, even though that you know things have happened, under the excuse of, oh, well, you know, they don't want it to be investigated, so I'm not going to take it any further. And I just think that is just a complete abdication of responsibility to do that. And it happens so often. And there's so many male managers out there who are well aware of what's going on, but they choose to stay silent to protect their male buddies and effectively close ranks against women. And I think that is something that, you know, it shows through the report, and also is something, you know, that needs to be tackled. And I think that's where the piece about education comes in. You know, and it's not dissimilar to other issues that I've been involved in across my career, within, for example, around, was previously at the chair of Glasgow rape crisis. And that's the same, but like investment in schools and education is the really, really hard stuff. That's not like the sexy stuff of, oh, we'll just give violence against women charities £1 million because the First Minister's feeling generous today. Like actually sustained investment in education in the early years at school is something that's not actually that sexy and is actually really hard, particularly if you're going to properly pay for practitioners to come and do it and not add it to the workload of teachers, which is quite often, how these things are done. And I think that is one of the ways that you're really going to tackle this is, a proper education and awareness campaign that starts at a really young age. I suppose that takes me on to, what trade unions can do and how everyone on this call can make a difference. And I think it's pretty clear from the report that we can't rely upon legislation. The Tories are in power, so I doubt we're going to be able to rely upon getting any new legislation. And I would almost go as far as saying we can't rely on workplace policies. However well written or well intentioned, they really make little difference in practice. And I think for too long, the trade unions across the piece, not just in relation to sexual harassment, but really in relation to anything, focus on the policies and what the policy says too often, because there's no nothing legally that you can be done for an employer that breaches the policy, so they just breach it with impunity. But they're quite happy to spend hours and hours and hours negotiating with a trade union over a policy because, frankly, it detracts from negotiating about something that actually matters. And I think that, that's something that everybody should be aware of. And I think where that takes us then is that, we need to have organised workplaces. We need to have workplaces where, if sexual harassment goes under, untackled or unchallenged, or a woman suddenly gets stopped getting shifts because she's reported sexual harassment, there is some sort of industrial response to that. And I think it's important, as has been reflected in previous contributions, that the industrial response must bring together groups of workers across the workforce. It can't simply just be a women's issue. And I think, a really good example of that was, I know they're balloting for strike action again now, but the Gmb Equal Pay Strike a few years ago, whereby the refuse workers stood strongly in solidarity with the women that were in the fight for equal pay. They were made it patently clear that they were not going to be made out, basically the employer would say, oh, well, we'll need to cut the pay of men to pay the women, and the men were just like, won't be having it. And I think that's important, and that is another challenge in terms of how we take these campaigns forward. So I just want to finish tonight with a little bit of good stories about the differences that trade union members can make. And I'm delighted that Rachel Rogers from the Fire Brigades Union is on the call tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing her contribution. But I know, having worked with Rachel as a trade union rep, that the first-hand difference that women trade union reps can make. Women not feeling supported and coming forward is one of the the glaring things that comes out of this report. And I have worked on more than 1, 2, maybe 3 cases where Rachel has been involved, and she's really supported women in coming forward to make allegations of sexual harassment or sex discrimination in the workplace. And I think that's such a powerful thing, because sometimes that you will be the first person that woman has ever been believed by. And I think by believing women and believing in women to help them through the process of reporting, it can be a really, and it sounds like I'm putting it too high, but it's not. It could really be a life-changing intervention when you consider what it would be like for that woman to go through that alone. So I don't think you should ever underestimate, the power that you've got to make a difference. And I have seen that firsthand. And I think bringing issues of sexual harassment to the bargaining table as well. Again, often when we have discussions about terms and conditions, women's issues, are always missed off the agenda. The talk is always about bonuses or holidays. And I think that applies to all aspects of women's lives. It's not just about sexual harassment. It's about maternity leave. It's about time off for miscarriage or abortion, about the menopause. Quite a lot of this is missing anytime terms and conditions are negotiated. And I think, sexual harassment has to be at the forefront of those discussions. How our workplace is going to deal with sexual harassment. What are the companies going to do when people bring forward these discussions. And I think, you know, trade unions have led the way on all these issues for decades, and there's no reason why we can't lead the way forward on these issues. So I do think that we can all make a real difference, and we can change it, but we all have to fight to make sure that that's done. And I will leave it there, Lorna, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone's got.
Wonderful, as always, Gillian, just the perfect amount of riling us all up, but giving us a wee bit of kind of positivity in there as well. I think, you know, your words, you know, we can all make a difference. I totally agree with that. And I think you've gave excellent, you know, tangible examples. The most profound for me was, you know, the whole one person's word against another. There's no evidence. The women's the evidence. And then you further quantify that with saying if someone was to witness somebody stealing something, one person was to witness somebody stealing, they would be more than happy to take that person as a witness. So just an excellent comparison, a really, really profound, tangible example that you gave. But yeah, wonderful as always. And I think you you articulated the kind of precarious working environments as well, and the exploitation that comes with as well. You know, that's obviously going to be prevalent in our discussions this evening as well. This idea about, you know, that's the workplace culture, don't speak up against it because you won't be asked back for a shift tomorrow, all that kind of a stuff. So an excellent input, and just thank you so much, Gillian, for your contribution there. Amazing as always. So next excuse me, I'm just checking my notes here. I'm going to introduce Iona Fife, and it gives me great pleasure to do so. Iona is a prominent musician and has become one of Scotland's finest singers, and in 2021 was awarded as Musician of the Year at the MG Alba Scots Trade Music Awards. So, or is it Trad Music Awards? I do apologise, Iona, you can keep me right when you come on. Iona is also a member of the Musicians Union and an advocate for tackling sexual harassment at work, particularly within the creative sector. I've been at various events that Iona has spoken at, and I always find it absolutely fascinating. And I'm just so thankful you gave us your time this evening, Iona, and ready whenever you are, by the way.
Thanks so much for having me. Well, Roz kind of started off talking about the need for workspaces and employers to not remain silent. But unfortunately, in the music industry, unless you might be a classical musician working in an orchestra with maybe a good HR department, or maybe there's not a good HR department, most of the time in folk, indie, pop, trad, there is no kind of infrastructure. It's a really informal and at times colloquial industry. And for me, that's what I like about it. That's what I love about folk music, is that it transcends generation, background, class, race, anything. It's an international language of music. I love it. But unfortunately, that makes the whole industry susceptible to power imbalances and people taking advantage of that power imbalances. And I must say that in my experience, this goes male to female, or, you know, man to woman. I am sure that there are situations that it goes the other way around, but as the report stated earlier, this is what we're talking about today. This is against women, microaggressions to huge aggressions and to serious assault and sexual assault as well. Yeah, so to begin with, being a folk musician, I grew up in Aberdeenshire, and I went to all these folk clubs, folk festivals, sing-arounds where people were just different ages, different backgrounds, and it was lovely. But from the very, very beginning, I noticed that the language that was being used to describe female folk singers was different to the language being used to describe male folk singers and male instrumentalists as well. And then later on in my career, when I was touring and giving opportunities to male musicians to accompany me, also women musicians to accompany me as well, I noticed that the way that the males were being introduced onto the stage was different to the way that I was being introduced onto the stage. MCs and promoters all over the world, not just in the UK or in Scotland or whatever, they were using words to describe what I look like, whereas they were using words to describe what the men sounded like and what their skill set was and how proficient they were as a musician, despite not realizing that if it wasn't for me, they wouldn't be at that festival. I was their employer, and I was the person that was pulling it all together and writing the songs, arranging the stuff, and getting them in a room. And it just felt so crazy that my skill set was being overlooked, and what I looked like was the thing that was being discussed. And oftentimes I would just shake this off, like, whatever, let's just get on to the job at hand. But then we go to the intermission of the gig, and you might go out to the CD stall, in which in several occasions I've had men in their very, very late years saying things like, boy, if I were 50 years younger, you'd be in trouble. And like, what do you do? I just stood there and froze. I didn't call it out. And at the time, I probably didn't even bring it up to the musicians that I was touring with, because I was just like, oh, let's just get over and done with. I don't want anything more. And then you'd go to the CD stand, and then you'd sell a few CDs, and then someone would clap your arse, and then you'd freeze again, and then you'd have to go back on stage and do another 45 minutes, and then do an encore, and then hopefully sell more CDs, and then drive home. Or if you are touring, the way that folk music has always worked and does now work for emerging artists, even myself, is that some of these art centres and folk clubs, they don't like spending money on accommodation. Oh no, they like putting you up in the committee of the folk club's house. So someone who's a part of the committee will let you stay at the house, and that's it, instead of having budget to actually give you a hotel room or one or two rooms to make sure that you have a bit of privacy. Then when you go back to the house, you're expected to chat, and you're still on. You're still physically on. Your brain is functioning, you're still on. And then there has been horror stories, not in my case, but there's been horror stories of women going to bed and going to sleep, and then there's a knock at the door opens, and whoever is hosting them, it can get really, really, really horrendous. So the folk music scene has like a horrific situation where there's this colloquialism, and there's maybe, if you're not a huge band, even I've heard of even really, really big revivalist folk singers being put up in people's houses and not being given a hotel. So it does affect everyone at every stage of their career. They might be subject to this colloquial nature of the industry. I'm panning in on folk music. I want to take a step back. We were talking about people coming forward and the fact that silence is complicity, and in that case it 100% is not the women speaking out, as Lorna said, the men who see it happening and don't call it out. Time and time again, there's men protecting men. Sometimes, I hate to admit it, there's women protecting men as well, and that happens in the music industry so much, because maybe that woman wants a dep gig with that band, or maybe we're not all saints, and we're not all sinners, but like a lot of the time it goes both ways. And the fact that you're going to protect somebody that you work with because you don't want their reputation to go down the pan, because then you're going to lose work with them. Women protect men too, and we definitely have to talk about that. But yeah, a lot of the time it's men protecting their pals. And if this could be a microaggression in a pub where a guy is saying something sexist or misogynistic about a girl who maybe is playing in the session. Yeah, and the guy doesn't call it out. It's just a bit of crack. And that's the word that people use all the time. It's just a bit of crack. But it's not. It's not, because these microaggressions add up and up and up, and creates a community of practice where sometimes it will go too far. And what begun as a microaggression ends up in full-on assault, or full-on coercive control, or a protracted situation where someone can't get out and someone is at danger every time they go to work, or every time they are maybe at a folk festival or a festival that they're on the same bill as someone. For a woman to go, oh, I'm really excited, I've got this great opportunity, I'm going to play at this great festival. Then they look down the bill and they go, oh, but they're playing. And that whole situation is undermined. That whole fact that they've achieved a booking, they've gotten into a great position, it's undermined by the fact that someone who maybe abused them or assaulted them or even just said something inappropriate is there. And then the dread in your stomach begins to grow. And what was once a really exciting prospect is now a dread. You don't want to go to work. You don't want to do it. You can't be happy. Like, you're worried about it. You can't sleep. Your entire life spirals. And this happens so many times. And sometimes we just don't talk about it, because sometimes talking about things and admitting, actually, I'm not really doing too well, people think of that as being weak or not being able to handle the industry. And especially in music and acting and in the creative industries, if you show sign of weaknesses, people just, or if you show that any emotion, people just think that you're not cut out for it. When in reality, we're not really cut out to be abused or assaulted or have sexist, misogynist comments thrown at us constantly. No one's cut out for that. I think that the Musicians Union have done a sterling effort and job in creating, codes of practice for people to sign and for supporting people in individual cases that's come about. One situation that I have constantly spoke about, because I've been overwhelmingly amazed by it, is that a few years ago I'll backtrack. When we're talking about things that happen, it's very easy to talk about it, behind closed doors. Well, it's not very easy, but for me, it's easy. But it's not easy to talk about who it's about, because what if they come after you? What if they want to come after you for defamation or libel? Like, what if that police report didn't work out? A scary thing is the fact that if you finally decide to tell someone, what if they don't believe you? And a huge example of this is that several years ago, there was a photo taken. Taylor Swift was groped by a label executive. There was a photo of it happening. She spoke out about it. He lost his job. He sued her. She countersued him for $1. She won. But that was a protracted case that took up most of her 20s. No one wants to deal with that. That's why so many people will remain silent. And there's this horrific situation where men are protecting men because of their vested interest in business. But having allies of all genders is really, really important. And a few years ago, there was a situation when the Me Too kind of movement within trad music was happening, where a band leader decided that he would investigate his band. He heard some rumors, so he reached out to several women and asked, hey, has this person ever been inappropriate with you? If so, tell me right now, or please feel free to have a conversation with me. It was very nice. Then he investigated further and further and further, and found out that one or two specific members had varying degrees of inappropriate behaviour, one being worse than the other, much, 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 much worse. I think it ranged from a comment which was apologised for to full-bore explicit pictures, solicitation, harassment, physical assault. That band member was kicked out of the band forever. And it was a very public thing. That was the first time that women in the community of practice saw actual repercussions happening for someone in a folk band. We hear a lot of the time that women are being so courageous talking about things, but the fear of actually naming stops us from doing that. So for a man running a band of his own volition to make sure that who was in his band was being appropriate, and signing the Musicians Union Code of Practice and getting rid of the perpetrator was a huge sign to women that he was an ally. And just having that one person do that would probably encourage so many women in the folk music industry to speak out, and know that people hopefully will listen to them, they are believed, they're heard. And I think the sign of that is that you need to listen to your fellow workers and your musicians. And what Eilish was saying, sorry if I haven't pronounced your name properly, about oh, that's just Phil. Oh, that's just them. That's not good enough. That's not appropriate. And it happens all the time in music. Oh, that promoter, he's just a wee bit handsy. Oh, that agent, oh, difficult, but he'll get you work. No, that's not acceptable at all anymore. It never was. But then we do have the comments that audience members make. We've got comments that other band people make, other women could make as well. There's assaults being hurled at you from all angles, and that's why it's so important to be part of a really important community of practice like the Musicians Union, like the Women's Committee of the STUC. And I really, really hope that everything changes, that people do have their reckoning, and that there's more support there for women who call things out. And yeah, we heard Gillian talking about the way that the media portrays a lot of things. And actually, unfortunately, when people do come forward, the media jump on it. And some people are better at reporting than others. Some people want to use sensationalist language. Some people just want the story. But some people genuinely want to bring attention to the cause. So not only do you have women who are speaking out, they're worried about speaking out, but they're also worried about how the media is going to react. Is it going to be positive? Are people going to be thinking that, oh, that person just wants a bit of press? Do they think that there's going to be men in a room somewhere playing tunes, laughing about the situation? These are all the things that goes through my head. And it's not good enough. But the thing is that when we're talking about men calling out other men, the same men who are abusive and aggressive and harass women and who are volatile towards women, that's sometimes their personality. Sometimes it isn't just an isolated incident towards women. It could be that they're just a volatile, aggressive, abusive person. So some men don't speak out because they also feel threatened as well. So we should encourage our fellow workers and our fellow musicians who are men that speaking out is good. There has been an amazing amount of work done by the Bit Collective and done by Fair Play over in Ireland, but sometimes male voices are glaringly absent from the communication. And I wonder if that's because they're feared that if they speak out, there'll be repercussions for them. So we need to support everyone of every gender to call it out. And I would love to see a targeted campaign just called Call It Out. So in that immediate moment where there's an audience member being handsy, it'd be great just for someone to go, stop, that's inappropriate. But we're frozen at the time. But if I wish I went and told my band members, oh, this happened, and they would help me call it out, they would call it out. I wish, you can wish and wish and wish all you want, but at the time you're frozen. And we were talking about I'm going to shut up very, very soon. But there was a comment here about the longevity of how long you can wait until calling it out. And for me, I feel like there shouldn't be a time period. I understand that in law, there's things like statutes of limitations. Like, I get that. But I think that if something happened 4 years ago or 5 years ago, that same person is out there doing the exact same to other people, and they might well be doing it now. I think that shouldn't stop anyone from calling out anything in any sort of workplace, not just in the music industry. But I understand there's complexities to that. In conclusion, it's great we're having this conversation. I'm so proud to be part of the Musicians Union. I'm so proud to be part of this, I keep saying, community of practice. I've been very nervous to talk today. If anyone has any questions, spear them at me. But other than that, just call it out. That's all. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. As always, Iona, you were just on point with everything you said. I think it's horrific. Yeah, obviously, you opened up by talking about the power imbalances, but to give those examples, the idea about a woman staying in somebody's house and the bedroom door getting chapped, and just that's terrifying. Somebody put on the chat about your skin crawling, and you can feel it. You can physically feel how uncomfortable it is. And I think, you know, you're talking about even just small things, but it's not small, it's really, really, really big, but people are commenting on you because of how you look, and then the main it's how they sound, and it's just unfair. It's an imbalance before you even start. And I think that we all agree, just men should call it men, absolutely everybody should call it everybody, but the idea that a woman wouldn't call out a man, you know, when it's, you know, you should be a sisterhood, you know, you should be doing that, and to me it's something, and as we said, it's this silence, and it shouldn't be the case. And I think, you know, the idea about it showing a sign of weakness as if, oh, you know, that's just what they're like and you need to take it and this is your industry. Not at all, not at all. And your targeted campaign, call it out, I love it. I think that's absolutely excellent. Just a simple thing, and it would be so effective, just those 3 words, and it seems so obvious, but this is why we need to keep highlighting these things and raising awareness. But absolutely excellent as always, Iona. I always enjoy listening to you, your lovely speaking voice and your excellent points, and just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So yes, next we're going to, I'm very pleased to introduce Rachel Rogers. Rachel has worked as a firefighter for 13 years and is an active member of the Fire Brigade Union. She has been the Women's Regional Rep since 2019, representing women across, members across Scotland, and is currently the chair of the National Women's Committee. Rachel is also a member of our STUC Women's Committee and has been involved with the shaping of our work on sexual harassment in this report. Obviously, I can speak personally and say that obviously Rachel's a sister of mine and a sister of the movement, and our work's been totally invaluable for this report and our input, and I just look forward to hearing what you've got to say, Rachel.
Thank you, Lorna, and thank you I feel quite privileged to be speaking with this amazing panel of women speakers. Everyone who's gone so far have been absolutely brilliant. What it has highlighted to me is that we're all facing, whatever job we're in, you know, I came here with the background of being in quite in a very male-dominated workplace. We're all facing exactly the same kind of issues and the same challenges, and we're coming across the same barriers when we're trying to deal with these cultural issues. And also thank you to Gillian for what she was saying earlier. It's always a pleasure to work with Gillian, and I'll probably come to that a little bit more later on, just the kind of the understanding of working with other women when we're trying to support women who are facing these issues, which is always, as I say, it's quite empowering. So as mentioned, I work in a heavily male dominated environment. The fire service currently is 94% male and 6% female. So I think the culture that we have throughout society is maybe very prevalent in that workplace. We're coming into an environment where it's men working with men, and they're used to the banter and the chat, and almost in some cases it can be quite a toxic masculine environment. And when a woman comes into that environment, especially when you're maybe the first woman on a watch, what quite often happens, and it is still happening today, is the watch will be brought together and told, right, we're getting a woman, you know, and that in itself sets a tone already that, right, you all have to behave differently now, and you've got to be really careful, and you're going to end up getting into trouble. And for me, what is that actually saying about that environment as it is without a woman in it? So recognizing why we need diversity to try and bring a reflection of what's going on outside into the workplace, hopefully to make it better. I do think that can be improved by improving that level of diversity. But dealing with that culture we're coming into, which is very much banter, and I've worked with a lot of really, really great people, so it isn't that everyone is engaging in that culture deliberately, but you're very much taken along with it. And I think it was mentioned earlier as well about, women are quite often complicit, or they cover for men. You're wanting to be one of the team, you want to be one of the guys, you don't want to be standing out. So we put a lot of pressure on the women in the job to stick up for each other. And actually, as a kind of self-preservation, it's not that easy to do that. So we have to be quite careful not to put too much pressure on, our women colleagues, if you like. So with what I kind of wanted to talk about is where that environment, how we can challenge that environment when things are getting out of hand. Where does the line get drawn between what is banter and what is then turned into sexual harassment and inappropriate behaviour and having that negative effect? And when I'm supporting women in this role as a union rep, it's quite hard sometimes for people to understand where that line is. And I always say you've got to go with your gut, because ultimately we know it's wrong. And as Gillian said, we know what's wrong. We know how people should behave. But sometimes when you're in that environment, if everyone else is saying to you, this is normal, this is what we do, you just need to go along with it. And if you raise your hands up and kind of call this out, you're going to be kind of isolated. You're going to make your life very difficult. This will follow you throughout your career, that you're a bit of a troublemaker, that you don't go with the flow, and that you cause trouble. And also what you quite often hear is if you raise this and that person gets sacked, they're going to be out and you're going to get that person sacked, and it silences people, it silences us and makes us feel that we can't speak out because of the consequences, as though that makes it our fault. So it's victim blaming, isn't it? And I like the idea of this call it out for each other, and feel very strongly that we have to call it out for each other, because it's very, very difficult when you're the individual to be the one that does that. So making sure that we are able to recognise it and what it looks like, and not leave it down to that individual to be the one that has to speak up. So women not being believed, that's the other thing. That when you're in an environment which is heavily male dominated, and again, I'm hearing this throughout society, I do recognise that, but certainly in my workplace, it's quite difficult to be sure you're going to be believed, and then that management is going to believe. And then as you go through that process, what happens as you go through that process? You're constantly questioned. Again, something that Gillian mentioned is your word against theirs. It's one person's word against another person's. That is very often used as an excuse to say, it's probably in your interest just not to say anything about this. What if we get you a wee move? What if we move you away from this situation? The bottom line is that doesn't solve that situation is still there. Those people are still behaving that way. That person is still going to do that again. Just moving one person away from that is not solving the problem. But it's almost like that's the easy option. So I'm very much, if I am asked or contacted by someone who is experienced any kind of bullying, sexual harassment, I am very, very keen to say, no, let's challenge this, let's take it on. And what I always find is that is exactly what that person's wanting. They are just looking for someone to believe them, to actually understand what they're experiencing, not to question whether it's actually happening, or is it that bad, or he just got a bit carried away, or he's not used to working with women. That's one that I hear quite often. It's a big learning curve for these men, having to work with a woman. So just being believed and empowered to actually take on that challenge is, for me, really important. And that's probably one of the most satisfying roles of being a union rep for me, when I can do that for my women colleagues who are having any kinds of issues. So again, talking about whose responsibility this is, absolutely. And again, something that Gillian touched on was policies and procedures. That's great having all of those, but they aren't really the answer. The answer is that we all should have, we all need to take a bit of responsibility with this. One of the things that I find is that where everybody might know that an individual is behaving in a certain way, that everyone knows that guy's a bit of a perv or a bit of a bully, or he's got previous, but then nobody really wants to step forward and support the person who is the victim at that time. They don't want to get involved, they don't want to be responsible, and I struggle with that quite a lot, but it is a kind of cultural thing where everyone just wants to turn a blind eye and not get involved. So that, again, is something where we all have to step up, we all have to be responsible, and we all have to call it out. And I know I'm repeating what's been said by other speakers, but I just think that is one of the best ways that we're going to actually change this, and it's getting the message out. Unfortunately, I'm probably speaking to the converted here. So it's how do we get all the people that aren't here to start doing that, and you know, our colleagues. And one of the most powerful things for me in a fire station environment is when it is one of my male colleagues who'll turn around and say, that's not all right, you know, you can't say that, that's totally inappropriate, that's disgusting, you know. That's when it really kind of can make a difference, I think, having that support. So when it comes to having union reps within a male dominated environment that are women as well, we struggle to get women reps. I have certainly benefited from having Denise Christie, who was our general secretary for a regional secretary for a while, and Siona, of course. They've both been incredibly supportive and have helped me move through the union and become more confident in supporting and helping my fellow sisters in the FBU. So because we've got so few women reps, it can be quite difficult to have enough women reps to support each other throughout that. So trying to bring more women into the mainstream union is, I think, something we should all be trying to do, because I think that's really powerful. Having women supporting women and representing women, it makes it, you have to explain less to a woman when you're experiencing sexual harassment. They get it straight away. You don't have to deal with the questions or the, at what point did you not say that wasn't okay? You know, it's like Iona was saying, you sometimes people freeze, they don't always challenge things the way that other people think they should. So I think that is really important. I really like the call it out idea though, and I think that's a message that we really should be pushing, and if we can get more people to call it out when they see it and challenge it, then I think that will make a difference. So I think that I've probably spoken enough. A lot of the comments and points from previously I would repeat, but I'm not going to do that. So thank you. Thank you for letting me speak.
That was excellent, Rachel. I can't believe the fire service is 94% male, 6% female. I mean, I thought I would have assumed it would have a very high figure, but that's, and as you see, the challenges and the barriers that brings. It was a wonderful input, you know, and I think about what you're saying is you're putting a lot of pressure on those women, those 6% of staff, to be sticking up for each other as well when they're already up against it in such a male-dominated environment. I think that was an excellent point you make. The most infuriating line so far of the night goes to you, Rachel, and it is he's not used to working with women. That's been said to you in official meetings.
It's a big learning curve, you know, working with women. I don't know, when it seems to be that for some people believe that when you step over the threshold of a fire station, you suddenly forget about all the other women in your life and can't deal with it, you know.
That's just infuriating, absolutely infuriating. Well, thank God you've got women like yourself and Denise Christie and tackling these things head on, and obviously you've got the full support and solidarity of the full committee, and just excellent, Rachel. Thank you so much for that input. That was as I say, you've got the most, that's frustrated me the most so far, so well done. So the next speaker, everyone, our last speaker is Elie Dixon from Engender Scotland, who is a senior policy officer at Engender Scotland, going to be joining us this evening. Engender is Scotland's feminist policy and advocacy organisation, and very recently has been working on their own investigation and research in sexual harassment in the workplace, which the STUC and trade union women have contributed to. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and fire away whenever you're ready, Elie. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lorna, and thank you to everyone here this evening for inviting Engender to be part of this discussion, which timely comes on the eve of International Women's Day, of course. It's always challenging going last after such an excellent panel of speakers. And also, as Rachel mentioned, I think that the room that we're in, everybody here knows well and have heard in excellent terms tonight how sexual harassment undermines women's safety, well-being, their opportunities, economic position, and future career opportunities. And like other forms of violence against women, sexual harassment is a direct effect of and a cause of women's continued inequality with men in other walks of life. It relies on and entrenches persistent gendered structural inequalities and hierarchies between women and men that continue to make us poorer, more vulnerable to insecurity, further away from power and decision making, and further away from our human rights. The challenge, of course, is, as we've heard so often this evening, often the behaviours we associate with sexual harassment remain very easily normalised and often excused, sometimes in quite shocking terms for those of us who are deeply aware of the problem. But I think there is still a cultural tendency to try to reduce the behaviour that we would all find to be reprehensible, despite the long-lasting impacts that, of course, sexual harassment leaves for victim survivors across the very many areas of their lives that I mentioned above. So we need a specific gendered approach to sexual harassment, and Engender is currently working on a project which will look at innovative approaches to responding to sexual harassment within the existing devolution settlement. So we're looking at investigation, reporting, and accountability mechanisms that centre victim survivors and are rooted in an understanding of the power dynamics that are at play here. And so we're really pleased, as Lorna said, to have worked with the STUC in some of this work, including organising focus groups with women, which I will come on to in more detail. But of course, in the ambit of this project, devolution makes this really challenging. We remain severely limited in how far we can rip up employment and equality law and start again. And of course, Gillian said we shouldn't lose all faith in equality and employment law. There are issues with its implementation. If it were implemented better, if employers had greater understanding of what they could do in relation to sexual harassment, or I think actually maybe more greater willingness to use the tools at their disposal as they are in other walks of life, perhaps we would not, perhaps we wouldn't maybe have quite so many disagreements with employment and equality law as we seem to have on paper. However, despite those limitations, I think we have seen Scotland can commit to really radical action to protect women's rights when it does matter. I think it's fair to say that the Scottish Parliament has done some of its best cross-party, non-partisan work on issues of violence against women, such as the Domestic Abuse Act in 2018. So I do have a little bit of optimism, Our report is expected to be published in the spring. But tonight, I just wanted to share some of the key findings from our lived experience engagement with women who had experience of, or had witnessed, or had supported other women who had experienced sexual harassment. And of course, as Roz reminded us at the start, that is pretty much all women where we were looking to speak to. But we held not only a survey that was open to all women, we also held a number of small targeted focus groups, which explicitly looked at the experiences of further marginalised women. So we had focus groups and sessions with women of colour, with Muslim women specifically as well. We had sessions with disabled women, with LGBT women, young women, and partnered with the STUC to look at women who were in precarious and low paid work, to really make sure that we were directly hearing from some of the women who are most marginalised. And of course, this happens to every single woman, so every single woman's story is different. But what we did see, unsurprisingly, was the same trends coming through over and over again, albeit with sometimes compounding aspects of intersectional forms of discrimination. So what we found was, looking at this journey, I guess, from reporting to justice, anonymity for people making complaints was seen as vital for most people. One participant told us that that was the only way she could have even envisioned reporting, for fear that rumours might spread that would undermine her across her workplace. And yet, on the other hand, many of the respondents also acknowledged the difficulties that anonymous reporting represents. So it makes evidence gathering even more difficult. It makes it difficult for employers to take action, or at least employers will say it makes it difficult for them to take action. It makes access to tribunals and other forms of external adjudication more tricky. Or in fact impossible, and it sometimes doesn't necessarily mean that the victim survivor herself couldn't be identified, especially if you're talking about small organizations or sectors where there's a heavy preponderance of male employees. Many of the respondents to this work also noted that there remained a lack of transparency around reporting and investigation procedures. So in addition to a transparency around investigating and reporting procedures and processes, but that also there was this lack of transparency around consequences for wrongdoing and how culture was understood within workplaces. So for example, one respondent talked about how there was this gulf between the stated policy and the actual approach that management had towards sexual harassment and sexist behaviour, which put her in a position of uncertainty around how her particular case might be handled in practice, that dissuaded her from taking any action. So there's this lack of confidence, lack of transparency, and lack of predictability about how employers might respond. And it was very, very clear, unsurprisingly, that women do not trust internal processes and would much rather report to external independent bodies. One woman told us that the accountability wielded by management was akin to a fox being put in charge of the hens, which was a perfect metaphor, I think. We also found that there was this clear sense that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to sectors and when it comes to employment situations. So temporary or precarious workers often outline specific challenges in identifying appropriate reporting mechanisms and policies, while women in the arts and culture, arts and creative sectors, as Iona has brilliantly outlined tonight, spoke very often about the need to depend on particular networks or people for current and future work in a kind of nebulous and often informal way that ensured that these networks often solidified around perpetrators to protect them or to maintain the status quo. Many women also spoke about a desire for greater education and awareness raising of what sexual harassment actually is. In particular for women of colour, there was quite often this sense that harmful behaviour was normalised as banter, and the onus was on the woman herself to understand the rules of the game, if you like. I think it's quite similar to what Rachel was describing, but within the particular context of women of colour or women who were migrant women and working in Scottish workplaces, there was also this sense of how they were othered in other ways, which demonstrated just how easily the sexism and misogyny that enables sexual harassment to be perpetrated within the workplace can interact with racism and other forms of oppression in ways that make it even more difficult for women to seek accountability or behaviour change. For example, if you're being told that it's just banter, it's just the way we talk, it's just the environment, it's just a joke, get over yourself, it makes it more difficult, and it has this almost gaslighting effect for women in those situations. When it came to reporting, women described in many of the forums that we held the ways in which the process itself caused further harm, particularly on their mental health, their relationships, professional relationships, and possible future career opportunities. And these so-called unintended consequences reduced their faith in a system even further and compounded the harm associated with the original harassment, specifically for them, but also for the women who saw how that was taken forward, who witnessed it, who supported their colleagues or female friends through this. And it wasn't a surprise to us, as I'm sure it's not to you, and it's something that we hear routinely about how the criminal justice system understands violence against women and the way it treats victim survivors of gendered harms. So the lack of the gendered approach that I mentioned at the opening of my remarks, and the investigation process that breaks down or separates instances of different behaviours, was described vividly as a means of maintaining the systemic imbalances in power. So one woman told us, I'm going to quote here, that obviously not taking away from the seriousness, but acknowledging the ridiculousness of how the behaviour in isolation can look, but when it's seen as a whole, becomes a horrible experience, making people feel constantly uncomfortable. This is in reference to my experience where it was comments on look, figure, sex with partners, or sexual remarks, and that this language from a male co-worker to a female colleague would obviously, I think, to many of us, undermine any woman in any context, but acutely so in the workplace. And that shouldn't be surprising, but I think speaks perhaps to this normalization of the types of behaviour, communications, or so-called humour that signals to women their separateness or otherness from the typically male institution. So as we talked about tonight, the workplace was designed by men for men, like many other spaces. And when women are entering into it, they're entering into it on a sort of lesser platform, if you like, and the sexual harassment and the sexist behavior and the camaraderie is all a way of signaling to women that they don't belong in this group, or if they do belong in the group, they belong in the group on men's terms. And when the reporting process breaks down individual instances, it's much more easy to dismiss it or to see it as humor, but it has a compounding effect, and many women will experience it not just in one workplace but throughout their career. So the last thing I just wanted to talk about a little bit is acknowledge that tomorrow a report will be launched by the Independent Working Group on Misogyny and Criminal Justice. And this group, which I have to declare an interest as I'm proud to have been a member of it, will make recommendations on how we can improve and fill gaps in the law that challenge misogyny, and particularly looking at criminal law. So it's explicitly about gendering the law, that making sure that law understands that the social power imbalances between women and men in our society remain deeply rooted, and we can't disrupt it by continuing to just talk about harassment or other forms of violence against women as a gender blind issue. We need to have targeted gendered approaches. So we can only respond to misogyny, I think, if we name it and train people to identify it. So many of the behaviours that this group has been looking at and is trying to address are harassment and sexual harassment, and like sexual harassment at work, are rooted in maintaining this dominance of men in public space, both online and offline. So challenging the spectrum of behaviour is not only and not always the role of criminal law, but I think the report gives us a real opportunity over the coming months, in coalition with some of the recommendations from the STUC report, from the work that Engender has been doing, to push for change that I think the women in Scotland and around the UK and around the world have been increasingly vocally demanding, particularly over the last year. So I think there's an opportunity to think about this holistically, to be challenging and to be innovative, and look to root out all harassment and violence in all its forms. So I will leave it there. I'd just like to thank Lorna for chairing, and to the STUC Women's Committee again, and my apologies for inevitably reducing our Q&A time even further.
Not at all, no apologies, Elie. I think that's a common women response to things, isn't it? Giving an apology at the end of an absolutely wonderful input. Not at all. I found it absolutely fascinating. I was writing down notes because you articulated things so well. I thought it was excellent. I think to say you've got a little bit of optimism again. There's wee threads of optimism through this evening, which I think is great, and I think we need to keep that in mind. The idea of speaking to the most kind of marginalised women for this research, and women of colour as well, and the kind of onus being on them. You're not understanding the banter. This is the way we talk. This is our culture. I absolutely, that resonates with me. My previous job, I worked for to me, it's victim. It's being beaten and victim of gaslighting is again a kind of common thread amongst everybody's input this evening. It's just putting the onus back onto us all the time, and you almost have to get a situation and then be able to understand it straight away so that you know how to act. And it's this otherness, definitely, and this separateness. But yeah, absolutely wonderful. Elie, thank you so much for your input. I believe we've got some questions, so I'll have a wee look through the chat. Or Erin, are you want to ask the questions, or are you happy just with me having a look through?
Yeah, just go ahead. I think firstly, I think there was a question from Elaine and was it Liz? Let me just check.
It was quite far back, or was it? I do remember. Yeah. Oh no, that's Eileen. Sorry, yes. Everyone.
So there's one.
Oh, there we are. Yeah. So we've got till 8 o'clock, so a week and 20 minutes questions and answers. I think that's quite a good amount. So Elaine from Unite and from the STUC Women's Committee had asked, what can the individual trade unions do to educate members and reps on this issue, which would help to create the correct environment in the movement? So, you know, if we want, we can do it in order, or if we want, just put your hand up if you want to make an input, or if you want to answer, whatever you would like. Anybody? Iona?
I think the Musicians Union does such a good job, but maybe an incentive for particularly men, but all genders, to partake in training would be some sort of discount code for workshops or for their membership for the year after or something. I don't know. I don't want to give away the union's money. That's not a good idea. But like some sort of incentive to be like, hey, let's you complete this 2 hours training, and then we bring in people to host the training. I don't know, that maybe that seems like it's too mollycoddling or whatever, but some sort of incentive, because people they're so done with meetings and they're so done with training and they're so done with stuff. But like, I think that it's very important to train up new members as well, but also member reps. I think if you're involved with the trade union movement anyway, you're going to know the pertinent issues. So it's more so I'm talking about members who have maybe just joined the union, or they've, you know, just became a musician, or they're transitioning, or they're been in the industry for years. Like, you know, some sort of compulsory trainings. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe it's a bad idea. That's just what went to the top of my head.
Thanks, Iona.
Yeah, thanks, Lorna. I think actually there's some really good recommendations in the report about what unions could be doing to train up reps. And I think the idea that, you know, as part of basic reps training, some sort of training around sexual harassment and how to support workers, and the expectations and definitions of what we mean by that, would actually be quite important to include in all reps training, because, you know, it shouldn't always go to the women's rep or the equality rep. Actually, all reps in all workplaces should be geared up to deal with this, and reps have a very important role to play, I think, in helping create a culture in a workplace, and set standards of acceptability. So they could have an important role in prevention, as well as having an important role in supporting people and making people feel that they would be somebody that they could go to, that would understand and support them. I think where a lot of, you know, there'll be as many people who've gone to their manager with a complaint and had the wrong answer back and not felt empowered with that complaint, but there will be people out there who've gone to reps and not had the right answers back or the right support as well, and that's something we do need to tackle. I also think that we could, you know, maybe be thinking that whole idea of a call it out campaign that Iona was talking about. You know, for me, it does start with the culture in workplaces, and I think it was very well explained as well, you know, that the idea around, and I do think in Scotland, I don't know if it's a West of Scotland thing or if it's, you know, a working class thing, but that idea that you've got to go along with the banter, and if somebody is a put down for you, you've got to have an even worse put down for them. And having worked in quite male environments as well, the idea that you've got to be able to roll with the punches and you know, your language should be filthier than theirs or whatever. You know, that is there, but that's how you stand up for yourself, etc., etc. That's something I think we all, you know, as trade unions, there could be a real role there in tackling that cultural stuff, that banter actually can be really dangerous, and that, you know, there's no such thing as it's just a joke. If somebody's uncomfortable with it, then it shouldn't be happening, or maybe it just shouldn't be happening in a professional environment. You know, that's not the place for banter. So I think there's, you know, maybe work to be done there. We all like to have a laugh, but you know, when that's based on power structures and it's based on misogyny, you know, we maybe need to start drawing a line about what is acceptable and what isn't.
Absolutely, absolutely, Rose. I think, as you say, it's a professional environment here. You know, it's absolutely just a zero tolerance. Then there's no ambiguity, and that's really that. Rachel, you were next to come in.
Yeah, so I completely agree with what Ros was saying there, in terms of that rolling with the punches, and you know, almost like you don't want to be the one that comes in and everyone blames for ruining all the fun, you know, by being offended or not putting up with it. Matt, the point I was going to make was about training, and I do think that is a challenge that we've got, because I'm not sure what kind of training works in this kind of area. I think we do need trainers reps, and we can put it throughout all of the training courses. I think should have this throughout them. But I think what really works is maybe some just an idea, but maybe some sort of working together with a sort of succession planning, where you've got reps with the experience and the understanding already. I know I do regularly have conversations with my colleagues within the FBU who are the male reps, and you know, we do quite often have good discussions, and I think that you've got to try and bring people along with you into understanding this. Just standing in front doing the equality diversity training, rarely, I find personally, I don't find it's that effective for people who don't get it. They just kind of switch off and go, oh, yeah, oh, listen to that, you know, and then it's gone the next minute. They've actually got to understand and be brought along with it, and I do think that is a challenge that we've got. So.
Thanks, Rachel. Gillian?
Yeah, no, just like, I kind of see it as like almost twofold. Like, I think you need, I just think there is a need for some sort of generalised awareness raising at like rep training level of sexual harassment and the way it manifests itself, and how people might react to it. But I also almost think, I'm thinking in particular about more serious cases, and remember you saying, Rose, that you were like a sexual harassment like rep and you were trained to deal with those specific cases. And I do think there is a need for that. I think there's a need for reps who are trauma informed to be able to represent women coming forward, because it's a really, really big responsibility. And, you know, if you think about that type of role in other contexts, you know, that would be like someone who is paid as a support worker at a rape crisis centre, or someone who has gone through a long, you know, even I know from my experience at rape crisis, like if you're a volunteer on their helpline, you go through months and months of training and role play and everything like that to do that. So I think, you know, that's probably something that we need to think about as well. I think the downside of that, especially the latter point, is that it would all be women that would sign up to be these reps, which is possibly a bit self-defeating. But I think for the women that you were seeking to represent, particularly in an employment situation, I think that would really make a big difference.
You want to come in, Elie, or are you happy enough to go on to the next question? No problem. It's quite handy that you did finish that one there, Gillian, because there's a good question here after you talking about the extension.
Just before you go on, Caroline from the MU has her hand raised, and I think what she's about to say is going to be pretty important to this one here.
Sorry, I didn't notice that. And I'm not messaging well, folks. I do apologise. It's just I've started at the questions a bit higher up in case anybody's trying to message me. Sorry, Caroline. Whenever you're ready. You're on mute.
Sorry. Really just to say thanks to the Women's Committee and to the contributors for organising and contributing to this really important event. And I suppose Gillian has just kind of picked up on the point which I was going to make, which absolutely, you know, the training has to be there, it needs to be there, it should be there at that base level, I think, for all reps and all stewards in all workplaces. But to kind of echo what Gillian said, I think that sadly the people that decide to take up that training are not necessarily always going to be the people that need it. So I think that there needs to be a kind of 360 approach. There has to be the training there. There has to be the continued initiatives that we have presumably across all of our unions. Just to mention the MU Safe Space initiative, which was established around the time of, you know, Harvey Weinstein and the start of the Me Too. So that's a kind of reporting mechanism whereby not just our members, but members, our musicians, or people who work across the industry can report instances of harassment and abuse that have happened to them. It's fed into a report, which I've actually shared on the chat a bit earlier on, so it's there for anybody that wants to see it. You won't be surprised at seeing some very familiar looking statistics which are echoed in the STUC report, which has come out today as well. So between the training, between the reports, between all of us calling it out, and between, you know, that, and I think actually the most important thing that we've alluded to earlier is having those male allies. Sadly, you know, we're in our own echo chamber here. We need the Rab Noakes of the world to be, you know, as vocal as they can be, because if they see it, then they will, you know, want to be it. As we've heard so much in our industry about, you know, trying to tackle the male dominance within lots of our industries. But actually, you know, I think if other men see other men calling it out publicly, there might be more confidence from other men to do it, because it just doesn't happen. You know, I'm sure all of us have sat around in similar events and similar groups and having the same conversations over and over again. And something in the music industry, we haven't seen much in the way of improvement, either in terms of representation in the industry, or really much improvement in a letting up of these harrowing stories that we've had tonight. And it's all interconnected, as we've already heard. So I think it needs to be a 360 approach between training and having the information there and having the stats and all of us calling it out and identifying those male allies and really, you know, pushing them forward to give them that voice, because we can't actually do it without them. But as I say, you know, there's MU resources there if anybody's interested. I've posted them in the chat, and I just want to say thanks again to everybody for this evening. It's been really insightful.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, it was a question earlier on from, oh, sorry, Iona. I'm just missing everybody's hands up tonight. And you come.
No, I was just clapping. That was just a wee clap emoji.
Sorry. Must be near my bedtime. So yeah, Liz Taylor put in the question talking about extension to grievance timeframes that Gillian, you had mentioned. What timeframe would you think would be appropriate? I don't know that was specifically for Gillian. I think just in general, if anybody wants to put on that.
I think in the report there was a suggestion that, particularly around the law of it, like the time limit should be extended from 3 months to at least a year. So I think that, you know, there's something like that would make a huge difference. And I think, as with all of these things, you always have to protect against it being drawn back at a future point. So to go from 3 months to 6 months, you know, might just mean that it's 3 months again in a few years, or, you know, after a change of government, because these are the kind of things that tend to be a bit of political ping pong between the two major parties. So I think you do have to overextend that to make it a longer period of time. So I think that what's in the report is a good suggestion in terms of a working way forward.
Rachel?
Yeah, just on that point, I mean, the 3 months to me is crazy, with the very nature of especially more serious sexual harassment or assault cases, it can take more than 3 months for that individual to accept themselves or be willing to face up to maybe what's happened to them. So I would hugely welcome, I think it'd be a really big step forward to have that time frame extended.
Thanks, Rachel. Rose?
Yeah, I would strongly agree that this would help a lot. I think that what happens if you've been through any sort of serious sexual harassment is you have feelings of self-shame, self-doubt, self-blame, and you know that sadly goes with the territory for a lot of women that have to experience that at work. So getting, you know, the amount of support and time it might take to get to a point where you would feel empowered enough to actually take the action that would, you know, result in a complaint is 3 months is just a joke, really, because, you know, you've got the internal stuff that may take place before you even get to the external, and you know, sometimes it can take you actually not being in the situation anymore before you realise how bad the situation was as well. So, you know, I totally agree that that's a very important part of this.
Thanks, Rose. I've got another question here for Iona from Fiona Steele, the excellent chair of our STUC Women's Committee. I wondered if the Me Too movement and the fact that some high-profile people in the entertainment industry were very publicly called out as part of that, rightly so, has had any impact on the culture of how men behave in the industry. Again, folks, we've only got another 10 minutes. I hope we'll get all the questions, but sorry if we miss anybody out. Iona?
Yeah, I mean, it's the ripple effect has went throughout the entire world, but in my specific part of the music industry, I'm not entirely too sure if the men in my community of practice are quite tuned in to what really went on, just based on, you know, if you're into folk music, you're into trad music, you're playing tunes, you're maybe not tuned into what's happening in Hollywood, or, you know, the amount of folk musicians I know who are very, very politically engaged but who do not watch the news, it's astonishing. So I'm not too sure to what extent has that affected this particularly tiny community of practice, but the ripple effect is quite big, you know, throughout the entire world in every industry. So yeah, that's all I can say on that.
Thank you very much, Iona. I've just got, sorry, I'm just making sure I'm covering everything off here. I think there's a question for you, Gillian. For instances where it's someone's word against another with no other evidence and a disciplinary sanction is imposed, possible dismissal, how can this truly be deemed as fair?
I mean, I think I don't really want to get into the complexities of the law too much, but I mean, the law on unfair dismissal is not the decision that the decision maker has to take is not whether or not the thing that is alleged actually happened. It's whether or not there is a reasonable belief that it happened after a reasonable investigation, and that's something that's completely different, and, you know, in a lot of cases makes things really difficult. Essentially, the employer doesn't have to demonstrate that what is alleged happened. They just have to have a reasonable belief that it happened. And that overall test is looked at in a band of reasonable responses, which, frankly, from my point of view, in the last 10 years has got ever increasingly wide, when given employers discretion to really do whatever they want, unless it's so like really wide unreasonable. And I think, you know, that is an issue. But in this, when we're considering sexual harassment, I think that's an issue that should be in favour of doing things to tackle this. But I think as a generalised point, the fact that employers now have pretty much carte blanche around unfair dismissals, you know, as a wider campaigning point, you know, is undoubtedly concerning.
Thank you, Gillian. Rose?
Yeah, I just wanted, if it's okay, Lorna, to jump back to the last question a wee bit, because I just wanted to reflect on the fact that the Me Too movement was great for raising the issue, and I think for really empowering a lot of women, and hopefully frankly, for making a lot of perpetrators of sexual harassment think twice about, you know, that maybe things are changing and people are speaking out more. But I also feel that the Alex Salmon case in Scotland was actually very damaging to our cause of having sexual harassment in the workplace taken seriously, because ultimately it became down to a sort of criminal case of was there anything actually criminal that was undertaken. And actually you can have really bad gender-based bullying, abuse of power, harassment taking place without it having to get to the point of, you know, in a workplace, without it actually being a criminal offence. And I think it was pretty well established that there had been quite a number of abuses of power and inappropriate behaviour that had taken place by the most powerful man in the land. And yet the way that was portrayed in the media, I really feel that the people who were ultimately the victims of that harassment were really vilified. They were portrayed as being part of some sort of political plot. And I really think that did us a lot of damage as you know, for women who want to feel empowered to raise that issue. So, you know, as much as the Me Too movement was a good thing, we also need to reflect on how our media treated things like the Salmon case, in my view, which was, for me, damaging.
Excellent point, Rose, totally agree, absolutely. So we've got one last question, folks, and I think that's quite good because we're, as I say, just getting to the end of our session. So it was about anonymous reporting. Does anyone have an experience of anonymous reporting in workplace, and the fact that it possibly exists in a university setting? If anybody's got any personal input? Yes, Elie, thank you.
I had responded to Lisa in the chat who asked this question because we did have a look at some of the evidence. We commissioned an academic to look at the evidence on anonymous reporting and some of the models that exist. And what we found was, despite it being something that women really, really want, the evidence around its use is really mixed. And so what we kind of found is that there was a lack of quality research into how it was working in the situations it has been brought in, and that the problem with anonymous reporting, particularly with internal anonymous reporting, is that it's another way in which employers can control the process and create these networks where they can use kind of mobilize support around a perpetrator because they don't have a victim in front of them, or they don't have a named victim in front of them, or identifiable victim in front of them. And what we also saw was that in the international examples, you often found that there was often a disclaimer that was made that said no action could be taken unless a formal report was made with an identification. So there was an avenue for women to talk about their experiences, which was great for some women, but it didn't necessarily lead to any justice. So there were sort of benefits identified around it. It could encourage complainants to come forward, facilitate signposting, increase the likelihood of later formal reporting because they had that immediate advice and support. And if it was used correctly, there could be some joining up of data to inform organizational responses and changes to practice, or if a pattern could be emerged, the organisation could take action in a kind of non-grievance specific way. But it was really important to manage expectations around what it could actually deliver. And there's always a risk that it adds to this sense that sexual harassment is something that should be associated with shame for a complainant, or something that should be kept secret. And most instances, because of this idea of kind of equality of arms, not formally, but this idea that there had to be anonymization both of the complainant and the perpetrator in order to keep it fair, otherwise there might be scope for a wrongful dismissal. So it's really difficult, and it's something that we know that women want and would like to see options where they could make anonymous reporting, but how we do that, there hasn't really been a model identified that's given the right balance between support and justice, I think, so far.
Thank you, Elie and Gillian. Leslie?
It's not particularly on point, but one of the things that came out of the reviews into the murder of Stephen Lawrence around the police and how they reacted to basically to allegations of racism was that it was suggested within those reviews that one, you should essentially not do a gender pay audit, but basically you should have to report as a company the number of sexual, in that context, it was the number of allegations of racism in your workplace. Was one of the recommendations, and that should essentially be almost like a gender pay issue thing, and the companies should report on the number of allegations of racism that have been made in each year and essentially what has been done about it. Obviously, these were suggestions at the time, and unfortunately have never been implemented. But that was certainly one of them. And another one was to enable victims of racism in the workplace to come forward and provide, testimony to HR. And then obviously, if it's something that person didn't want to be taken forward at that time, essentially can be noted so that if it then keeps happening, there is a build up of things there. That there is perhaps issues with that if you were to use historic data and issues with evidence and things like that. And I can completely appreciate that. However, I do think that these are the kinds of things we do need to be thinking about doing. We need to think out the box about this and how we really put the pressure on employers, because we know from our experiences around equal pay that the kind of, oh, please be nice, please deal with things decently, has not and does not work. So if public naming and shaming is what is required, then I think that is something that should be considered.
Thanks so much, Charlene. That was great. So I think that's a really good place to close. Only 1 minute over, which is very impressive, I feel. So yeah, thank you so much for everybody that joined us this evening and setting your time aside on a busy Monday night. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I'm absolutely blown away at the input and the amazing contributions. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody that helped with the event. It's just been wonderful. Thanks to everybody at the STUC. Thanks to Erin McCauley in particular. And I think just a kind of call to action for everybody, beyond this event, we need to make sure that this issue is high in the political, policy and collective bargaining agenda. The Women's Committee will continue to lobby government and hold employers to account, but we need everyone to help me make these demands a reality. And from me personally, solidarity, sisters, brothers and non-binary siblings, and good night.